Okay, so as Rachel said, I'm going to be talking about why homosexuality in Jamaica is considered to be a threat to cultural and national identity. So for many years, decades even, homosexuality has been, and still is, a highly contentious issue. Homosexuals from both sexes have been labelled as deviant, sinful, abominable. The list goes on to even more derogatory adjectives, which I'm sure you can all fill in for yourselves. And I know that I don't need to go into any great detail here about the abuse, both physical and mental, that has been meted out to homosexuals across the world, including here in Britain, over the years. And it's taken a long and tough liberation movement to secure legislative change and fundamental freedoms for homosexuals in some places. It was only 47 years ago, in 1967, that homosexuality was decriminalised in England and Wales. And as most of you know, it was only really last year or so that gay marriage was legalised. But yet it's reasonably fair to say that despite opposition still existing here in Britain, the UK has made great strides towards LGBT equality over the last couple of decades. However, that is still not true for some regions in the world, and the Caribbean is one of those regions. In some ways reminiscent of the historical accounts of gay oppression in Britain, homosexuals in the Caribbean are also persecuted, socially ostracised, and often forced to hide their sexuality in order to lead normal lives. Of course, I do have to acknowledge the fact that a number of Caribbean islands have in recent years decriminalised homosexuality. The Bahamas is one that immediately springs to mind off the top of my head. But in a number of others, homosexuality remains illegal and it carries sentences of up to 10 years or more in prison. One of those islands, of course, is Jamaica. I chose Jamaica as a case study for my undergraduate dissertation and subsequently this talk because I grew up there. And you may call me biased, but I think that Jamaica is one of the most, if not the most, famous Caribbean islands. And we are famous for lots and lots of things. So we're famous. Is this even working? just out. Thank you. Cool. Thank you very much. So we're famous for this. Everybody knows about this. And we also love a little bit of this, okay? But we're also infamous, unfortunately, for this, and for making headlines like that one. Along with all of the positive imagery that surrounds Jamaica, the island has gained a certain notoriety worldwide for its inherent homophobia and its famously outward manifestations of that. Jamaica is now renowned for incidents of violence towards homosexual men in particular, and for the popularisation of homophobia through reggae and dancehall music. The homophobic lyrics of some of these artists, for example, Bounty Killer, Buju Banton, actively advocates killing gay men, and is now commonly known as murder music. Needless to say, these lyrics have sparked outrage across the world. So when writing my study 4 years ago, I wanted to take a deeper look at this kind of homophobia in order to shed some light on it and the reasons for it and why it's so deeply embedded in the very fabric of Jamaican society and why it is so difficult for those attitudes to be discarded. Trying to do that is in no way attempting to excuse this. No one, in my opinion, can ever excuse that. But having an understanding of how power and forms of oppression work forms a good precursor to combating them. And so I'm hoping that this talk, as I hoped with my dissertation, will provide some kind of framework for us to think through the nature of the problem and potentially find a basis for combating it, and maybe, if we're lucky, discovering the levels at which intervention might be effective. So to do that, I'm going to firstly paint a very brief picture of the virulence and pervasiveness of homophobia in the different spheres of Jamaican society, and then I'll discuss the three main causes that I identified of said homophobia. And there are three of those. There are three main elements that I identified. Hopefully, what have I done? I knew this was going to go horribly wrong. I really knew that. So there are three causal elements that I've identified. The first one is ideas of masculinity and how they shape gender relations and influence social, political and racial issues on the island. I'll look at the idea very briefly of the ideal type of the black Jamaican man and how homosexuality serves to challenge that ideal. I'll secondly look at the place of religion in Jamaican society and how that forms a basis for homophobia on the island, because the Christian doctrine holds an incredibly important position in Jamaican society and it informs the mode of thinking of the population, and obviously homosexuality falls in the opposing position to that particular mode of thought. And lastly, I'll discuss the influence of dancehall music on the attitudes of the Jamaican populace and how and why dancehall artists appear to be so anti-gay. So, it's a lot to do in half an hour, bear with me. First of all, how homophobia is expressed. So, this man is a reggae artist called Sanchez in Jamaica. I'm going to play you a brief clip of one of his songs, which is called Frenzy. Can I ask you to do this? And I just want you to, it's about the first minute or so, and I just want you to listen, and then I'll pause it.
On the empty, smoking fancy, sipping on some fancy, living up, living up, living up, living up. So come by my ladies, dainty babies, rocking and kicking the songs of all ages. Living up, living up, living up, living up. To all of my jiggers and my MCs, honey, honey, here if you love the MCs, you can't show me one. You're not in my category, rolling my truck, buckle up. Girls pull me over, asking me what's up. Living up, living up, living up, living up. So we roll along to Wendy's, find her ride. She and her friends, then step inside. Living up, living up, living up, living up.
Okay, so listening to the first verse of that song, this sounds very much like your generic, feel-good Jamaican reggae song. It's about hanging out and chilling with your mates, and I mean, what is not to like about that? But somehow, in the middle of talking about picking up his mates and rolling up to a chicken shop and picking up a couple of girls, Sanchez has managed to include this chorus, the lyrics of which I've got to put up on the screen that have been roughly translated from Patois to English for all of you non-Patois speakers out there. So I'm just going to play it for you, and hopefully the lyrics will come up. So just listen very carefully to what we're seeing here. So, Sanchez is making it clear, if you could hear that and sort of read the words on the screen, just in case anyone wasn't sure, any man who is gay can't hang around with him and his mates. And if you par with gay men, so if you hang around with them, you are also not welcome. Now, these kinds of lyrics are representative of the general anti-gay sentiment that permeates Jamaican society. To be honest, when you compare this song to some others like Chichi Man by T.O.K., which talks about shooting gay men and leaving their families in sorrow, this song is actually quite tame. But nonetheless, it's this kind of music that has gained the infamy that I talked about earlier and almost become symbolic of Jamaica. And it's not just music that represents this homophobia. It's present on almost all levels of society. So this quotation from Ruth White and Robert Carr forms a good starting point for analysis of homophobia in Jamaica because it shows that it's sustained from the highest levels of society to the very, very lowest. So how does that work? Well, first of all, it works legally. So in Jamaica, Article 76 of the Offences Against the Person Act states that anyone committing buggery with an animal or a man is liable to be imprisoned and kept to hard labour for a term not exceeding 10 years. Gross indecency with another male person is also against the law, maximum sentence of 2 years with or without hard labour. Now, these laws were put in place while Jamaica was still under colonial rule of Britain, and when African Jamaicans were considered to be savage beasts who were unable to control their sexual urges. Over 250 years later, despite the fact that these laws are not really enforced in favour of street justice, these laws are still in place. And despite increasing international pressure to decriminalise homosexuality, Jamaica has, over the course of time, steadfastly refused to do that. In 1998, Jamaica's Justice Minister, K.D. Knight, he rejected calls to repeal the legislation publicly because he says these laws were based on a moral imperative which hadn't changed. And that brings me neatly onto the next aspect of Jamaican society that is affected by homophobia, which is politics. In 2008, the Prime Minister at the time, Bruce Golding, in an interview with the BBC on Hard Talk, was asked if he'd like to live in a Jamaica where homosexuals can be a part of his cabinet, or any cabinet for that matter. After trying very, very tactfully to avoid this question, he finally came out and just said, sure, they can be a part of the cabinet, but not mine. Homophobia is institutionalised in Jamaican politics. The current Prime Minister, Portia Simpson-Miller, when she was campaigning for election in 2011, did something quite key, where she attempted to make herself different by stating that she doesn't have a problem with Jamaican gays being part of her cabinet, and she's promised a conscience vote in Parliament on the issue of repealing the law. Surprisingly, she's now been elected and that hasn't happened, but hopefully it will. But Jamaican politicians have historically used homosexuality as a weapon to tarnish the reputations of their rivals. So in 2001, for example, amid rumours that he was gay, the Prime Minister at the time, PJ Patterson, came out in public and said, "My credentials as a lifelong heterosexual are impeccable." It still sounds ridiculous every time I say it. The fact that he felt the need, though, to publicly affirm his sexuality like that points to a certain compulsory heterosexuality that is just simply expected in Jamaica. So, what happens to those who don't conform to that? To put it quite bluntly, they're subjected to vicious attacks by members of the community and the police. They're made homeless after being driven out from their communities, as well as subjected to gossip, verbal abuse by work colleagues, provided they can get a job if anyone knows that they're gay. I haven't got the time really to detail the number of offences or incidents of violence against gay people here, but there have been several, and some of them have been reported both nationally in Jamaica and internationally. Because the media in Jamaica does lap up these incidences of violence. There are a number of, front pages of images of violence being meted out to gay people. And the reason for it is because there is this ongoing curiosity in the public about which Batiman them catch now, which means which gay man have they caught now. And one reporter from the Jamaica Observer when he was asked about, people taking matters into their own hands and attacking homosexuals in the street. His response to a reporter from the BBC was, well, this is Jamaica. Welcome to Jamrock. There are certain things that you don't do. If you do them, you do them at your peril. So, in many ways, he's making it sound like homophobia is a part of Jamaican culture. And so, how did we get here? And that's one of the most important questions. Sorry, I forgot about that. So, as I said before, I'm going to discuss the idea of masculinity and what makes a man in Jamaica. Okay? The Dictionary of Social Sciences says that masculinity is a cultural product which differs depending on whose culture you're referring to. As a theorist that I came across in my research, Stephen Whitehead, points to what he calls the malleability of masculinity. The fact that what it means changes depending on context. So the quotation on the slide, the second one, shows that masculinity is developed from social context. There is no biological ideal that tells us what a man is. It's rather based on a fictional and superficial accounts, to use Whitehead's words, that give us that notion. So how does any of that relate to Jamaica? During slavery in the Caribbean, the colonial or Western idea of a man was centred on his role as a breadwinner and the head of his household. This was also true of African men in the 17th and 18th centuries. But in order to consolidate his power over male slaves and make the most profit out of them, white plantation owners had to take that role away. Male slaves were not allowed to have any form of patriarchal or familial dominance. As far as plantation owners were concerned, sexual intercourse between slaves was purely for their own economic benefit. Any child born to a slave woman was automatically a slave and therefore the property of the plantation owner. In some colonies, slaves were not even allowed to marry, and monogamous relationships between them were not in any way encouraged. Male slaves were forced to mate with female slaves chosen by plantation owners, as a form of breeding to create stronger slaves. Additionally, planters were always in fear of slave rebellion and so had to exert control over every aspect of a slave's life to keep them subjugated. And an easy way to do that was to take away their masculinity. But it wasn't just the plantation owners who were guilty of this. Their wives also would use male slaves to take revenge on their husbands for sleeping with female slaves, as they had a habit of doing. So if and when their husbands found out about this, the punishment for that slave was what it was called gyalification. So the word gyal in patois is the word for girl. And by gyalifying someone would mean turning them into a girl by castrating them. So male slaves were destroyed both physically and mentally by this treatment, and it continued well into the post-emancipation period. The 1850 Whipping Act introduced the punishment of up to 117 lashes for sodomy, and the era saw a rise in the prosecution of black men for sexual crimes. So the way black Jamaicans dealt with this treatment was to assert themselves by creating an identity based not only on what a man is, but what a black man is. So when slaves were emancipated, it was simply assumed by abolitionists and other members of society that slaves would just suddenly adopt the Western middle-class way of life. Men would be breadwinners, women would look after the home and children, and monogamy would just be the norm. That was quite stupid of them, because the reality was that 400 years of discouraging monogamy, forcing male slaves to mate, had a bit of an impact. Illegitimacy became rife, and the role of the father figure was peripheral at best. Manhood... Have I lost my face? No. Okay. Manhood among African Jamaicans came to mean male sexual dominance. It came to mean virulence and heterosexuality, particularly amongst the young and those who were still powerless. So, the ideal type of the black Jamaican man became one shaped by a nationalist discourse which celebrated heterosexuality and condemned sexual impropriety. in many ways, it's easy to see how homosexuality deviates from this ideal type. Okay, it doesn't coincide with the image of male sexual dominance that came about after emancipation. Once Jamaican men decided to create this identity of what a black man is, okay, someone who essentially is sexually dominant, can sleep around and do that sort of thing, and impregnate women, that was it. Homosexuals can't do that. Or in Jamaican men's minds anyway, they can't do that. And so therefore homosexuality deviates from the established black Jamaican masculine identity, and therefore it is simply rejected. That is just a brief snapshot of the entire theory behind this. But it's not the only one. As I said before, religion and music played a big part as well. So, I don't know how many people know this, but Jamaica is reputed to be a country that has the most churches per square mile in the entire world. Emphasis on religion permeates almost all, if not all, spheres of society. Religious rhetoric is used in political campaigns. It's the common practice of schools to conduct devotion in the mornings. Ashley and Rachel and I all went to the same primary school, and I'm sure we still have, not necessarily nightmares, but we do vividly remember having to stand there and sing religious songs and pray and stuff before the start and at the end of every day in school. And that happened in schools across the country, irrespective of whether or not it was a Catholic school or it belonged to any particular denomination. Christianity was brought to African Jamaicans during the slave period by Christian missionaries, mostly from Britain. And they were crucially influential in teaching slaves sexual respectability, which made sodomy indistinguishable from the sodomite. And that person was treated with fear, contempt, hatred, and disgust. And as I discussed earlier, this disgust lasted well into the post-emancipation period, as did the influence of Christianity in Jamaica. Christian teachings form the basis of Jamaica's moral value system, and as such, it helps to shape the rhetoric surrounding homosexuality. The church in Jamaica is generally very, very outspoken against homosexuality, and it commonly, if you talk to a Jamaican person on the street, you will hear them talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. They are always saying it, okay? Because religious rhetoric is that ingrained in society, and it's just regurgitated at different levels. For example, media reports of homosexuals caught in the act will state stuff such as, they were caught in the unholy position. And a classic example of this religious regurgitation at an international level can be found in the appearance of Shabba Ranks on Channel 4's music show The Word. Now, I don't know how many people may have ever seen this or heard about it, but everyone knows who Shabba Ranks is, right? Yeah, Shabba? Yeah, we should, if you don't, look him up. Okay, but he was a dancehall artist who was at one point very popular in Britain. However, he made this appearance on this music show where he refused to shake the hand of a gay man. And when he was questioned about it by Mark Lamar, the presenter, he advocated the crucifixion of homosexuals and quoted parts of the scripture that says, "Go forth and multiply." And then he pointed out, just in case we didn't know, multiplication happens between a man and a woman. Okay, and he again gained infamy as a result of this interview, and his popularity swiftly declined after it. But it just goes to show how pervasive religious belief is and how it influences the Jamaican people. And it leads me quite nicely, actually, onto my discussion of dancehall music. I don't have the time to go into the history of dancehall here, but just suffice to say that it's well known for its references to rude boy culture, as well as sexually explicit lyrics, which is known as slackness. Dancehall music, as well as providing a voice for the poor, which is kind of where it originated, because these artists have a tendency to speak out against the justice system, the political system, the economic system in Jamaica. It also glorifies access to guns, bling, sex, as a means of accessing power and identity. And this is where masculinity comes in, where I discussed it earlier. These highly sexualized lyrics, and I decided against giving examples or playing anything, trying to maintain a certain amount of decency here. These lyrics focus on a man's ability to work, which means have vigorous sexual intercourse with a woman, and thus solidifying his identity as a real man. Therefore, this socially constructed black male identity, which I talked about earlier, functions here as a symbol of power, which is a source of comfort for the economically disenfranchised, poor black men of Jamaica. So dancehall music is in many ways a byproduct of Jamaican masculine identity, which, as we know, is the total opposite of anything homosexual. Despite the slackness, funnily enough, dancehall is also very much influenced by religious belief. So many dancehall songs talk about having faith in God and praising Him, or uses biblical references. This song that came out when I was in year 10 or year 11 is called Bad Mind by Elephant Man, and it's sung to the tune of a Christian song called Hear My Cry, O Lord, which is actually based on a passage, I think in Psalms, I can't remember, from school. But the lyrics are effectively Christian. So masculinity, and it's an incredibly popular song, and masculinity and religion have a tendency to influence artists that make dancehall music. Because what they're doing when they're writing their songs and producing their songs is that they are representing their own personal values through their music. So many people may have heard of the artist Buju Banton. He was also another very popular artist here in the UK. But then he infamously made a song called Boom Bye Bye, which essentially was a song that was purely about shooting gay men in the head for being gay. It sparked international outrage. He was banned from the UK because from performing here as a result of it, many campaigns arose out of the release of this song. And he was called on to apologise, and he flatly refused. He said that this song represented his cultural values. They were his beliefs. And so when I have conversations with people about homophobia in Jamaica, a number of people always say to me, the music is the reason Jamaicans are so homophobic. That's not true, okay? The music perpetuates homophobia, but it didn't create it, okay? Because these songs come from people who have those beliefs, and their beliefs came from somewhere, okay? They didn't just wake up and decide that they were going to write this and try to turn everyone against homosexuals. They were brought up to believe those things, okay, from their ideas, again, of what it means to be a man, and also what scripture tells them, what they've been brought up to believe in school, in church, at home. So, this is just a whistle-stop tour, really, of the ideas that I discussed in my dissertation. And what I came up with, or what I kind of concluded, was that the three causal elements that I've identified for the production and sustenance of homophobia in Jamaica, masculinity, religion, and music, are all interlinked, okay? In talking about them, I'm not trying to give one element more causal weight than the other, not in any way whatsoever. I'm trying to show that they're all linked by Jamaica's colonial past, and that they all combine to form a part of Jamaica's national and cultural identity. Homosexuality deviates from all three of those causal elements individually, but it also stands in contrast to them as a unit. And while great achievements have been made, and I can't say that they haven't, Jamaica has advanced, especially since I wrote this, and even before that, it was advancing in terms of attitudes to LGBT people. These causal elements, though, are still very, very much at work in Jamaican society, at grassroots level, and also at levels of power, such as in the police. And so it does, unfortunately, still leave us with these images. So hopefully more change and more strides can continue to be made, hopefully if we begin to understand the reasons for homophobia in Jamaica. Thank you very much.